My name is Mark Vina, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all tech topics that are smart home, home automation, home security, and console gaming related. In other words, all the cool stuff. Today is Friday, August 21st, 2020. The weekend is just 24 hours away, actually less than 24 hours, and I hope all of you will have a great weekend. As many of you know, Apple refreshed their flagship and iconic iMac models a few weeks ago. It's probably going to be the last time we see the existing iconic design before Apple reportedly will be coming out with a brand new Apple iMac form factor, but more importantly, with Apple silicon CPUs. The word on the street is that's probably going to happen in the January, February timeframe, but who knows because Apple's involved. But anyway, Apple has come out with a new refreshed iMac form factor. Really not a change in the form factor itself, but an upgrade from a CPU and some other things that they've kind of tweaked it with. And I already have Apple jealousy because I always like to upgrade to the latest and greatest Apple iMac Macs, but I haven't done that yet. But I do have a friend that I did reach out to, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to chat with him. I thought it'd be a great idea for a podcast to get his impressions of his new swanky iMac and get his new initial impressions. Apparently, his full-blown review has come out today, and we'll refer to that in a couple of seconds. But with that, I'd like to introduce Dwight Silverman, the longtime technology columnist for the Houston Chronicle, as well, and I've said this before, a self-described connoisseur of the best places to eat in Houston. I know that's not your official title, Dwight, but when there are great places to eat, where all the great places are. Because I did live in Houston for 10 years, and it's a city that's still very close to my heart. Dwight, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I have to warn y'all this. I am working from home. My work desk is basically in the dining room next to the dining table. You may hear my cats. You may hear my wife putting away groceries or trying to shush the cats. But that's just kind of the work from home way it is these days.
And that's the way it operates, and it's called,
that's right.
When you hear the phrase, it's live television. This is live work from home, a live work from home podcast. So anything can happen, but I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. But before we get to that, to the reaction of your reaction to the iMac and your initial impressions, I want to talk about the work from home thing because, millions of Americans are still, working at home. A lot of them, it's been a brand new experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
Notebook computer sales have gone out of sight, especially peripherals that are associated with working from home. As more and more people have hunkered down and have not decided yet whether they'll be going back. And in fact, many companies are still asking their employees to stay home. But you've been doing it for quite some time, Dwight. So I want to talk about your work from home setup to get a kind of a flavor for the way you approach work from home activity.
Sure. So I've been actually working from home since the 90s, back when the Chronicle had a technology section. I would kind of go into hiding for 2.5 days at home, write most of it so that I wasn't distracted. Back then I had an ISDN connection.
Now you're dating yourself.
That's right.
I'm glad you didn't say a dial-up modem. You didn't go back that far. Although I know you did have that for a time.
Yes, did have that too. But and so I've kind of have been doing this for a long time. And I probably the main thing that I would recommend for people who've not done this or who are kind of struggling with it is, a lot of people who started out with it, started out working from home perhaps as early as March, wound up with setting up on the dining table, setting up, on the couch, trying to work, in the kitchen. One of the most important things is to actually get a place that's just for this if you can possibly do it. My setup, we're in a 2-bedroom condo, being empty nesters, and my setup is at the end of the dining room. I have a nice desk with a dual screen monitor set up, and kind of when I come here and I sit down, I can get into the work mindset, and that is probably the best thing. Keep your workspace cleaner than you would at work, and so that it's kind of you're business focused. And the other important thing I think is get dressed. I start at 6:30 in the morning, updating our websites, which is, we have an energy site called Fuel Fix, and I make sure all the latest energy news is up on that. And that takes about an hour and a half. And then I go take a shower just as I was going to commute to work. I put on clothes, and I make sure I have shoes. That's very important, and pants. And so that I'm actually like dressed, and there's like the ritual that you have for work is very important. And then finally, make sure that you have everything you need within reach, which may mean if you had a desk that you've used just in general for occasional work, I would suggest breaking it down and putting it back together like completely with an eye toward doing work for it. I did that initially when I started, and since I just got this iMac, I took it apart again and reassembled it, kind of knowing the way I've been working lately. So everything is just within easy reach. When you think about your desk at work, your phone is like right there. You have your place where you keep your papers over here, and set up your desk for work, not just for occasionally sitting down and using a computer.
No, those are really good tips. And what's interesting is that, of course, what's dramatically increased over the last few months, because people are working from home, is video conferencing. I mean, I did video conferencing quite a bit, but not on the level that we're all doing it now. I mean, I'm routinely on 8-9 hours of calls, video calls.
Right.
And I think the protocol has changed. I mean, before the pandemic, I could call into a video conference and get away with hiding the video because maybe I hadn't taken a shower yet, or I'm not, I'm in my jammies.
Right.
But today there seems to be a protocol that, if you're on a call at 8 o'clock in the morning and it's a video call, people want to see you,
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that is I think the advice you're giving is really good, in that you should just think about, hey, you're going to work. It's like you're hopping in the car and you're driving over to the office. What about any tech tips in terms of what are you using for things like, because I'm using AirPods now for my headphones, but what are you using for gear in terms of the audio? It looks like you're using AirPods as well.
I'm using AirPods also. I use AirPods. I also have if it has to be like really like high quality audio, there's another podcast I do where This Week in Tech, where they're really intense about how good the audio sounds. I have like a gamer headset with a microphone, and I do that. The other thing, we're both using virtual backgrounds.
Yes.
And I think that it's important, to pick a good background, particularly if you want to hide what's, behind you. So right now, what is behind me, if I didn't have a virtual background, is, my dining room and the living room beyond it. And you might see, my wife walking back and forth across there. That's really not something that you want. That's very professional. Not that having, a bar is that professional, but at least it hides it. And so one of the reasons, and this is a minor reason why I got this iMac, is that the Mac Mini I had, that it was originally my desktop, it was from 2012, didn't have the graphics power to do a virtual background. Right. And so I would wind up doing conference calls on a MacBook Pro that I had that could handle it. But then I would have to take the MacBook Pro out. If I wasn't able to like share my screen with the stuff I had on my desktop, that was kind of a pain to do it that way. So although that wasn't the main reason I did it, to me, it was important to be able to hide, my private life and concentrate on my work life. And so being able to do a virtual background, I think, is important. A lot of people have fun with it. Some people, put up just kind of a, basic background. What a lot of people do is if they have like a workspace that has bookshelves and so forth in it, but people are still walking back and forth because they're in like a small apartment, they take a picture of their workspace static and then use it as a virtual background. Right. So it looks like there's their bookshelf. You can see their books. You can it looks homey, but there's no like people walking back and forth carrying laundry baskets or chasing the dog. So,
well, and I think we should state the obvious too, is that you make sure that you're using an appropriate piece of wallpaper, because I have been on a few calls where, you see someone put up a piece of wallpaper saying, do you really want other people to see that wallpaper? And if you're working, again, when you're doing these calls, sometimes people get confused that, you're working in a virtual office environment and you want to convey a professional image for yourself.
Right.
No, and that's not to say you shouldn't have fun with it. Having a kind of a fun, and that's very much a Houston background that you have there, Dwight. With one of the downtown bars, in Houston.
Well, and I put this up. I had this up from last night because we did a staff happy hour last night, and so I was like, okay, I am in a bar, So I had a reason for doing it. I just left it. It's a fun picture. The important thing, I think, as you said, is that you want to hide what's going on in the background, but also it should be professional.
Right. Yeah, and and as you can see, as I play around with this little AirPod, and these are the new AirPods that just came out not too long ago. I've never had good luck with them. They pop out of my ear. I love the convenience, and the reason why I'm not using my trusty over-the-head headphones. I have I've got a new Jabra set, fabulous, is that when you wear over-the-ear headphones doing a podcast, the virtual background sometimes gets
yes, the virtual background, yes,
and you have like a black halo over your head. So so the advantage of this is that you don't have that problem, but the downside is that I'm always cupping this so the thing doesn't fall out of my ear. And I'm actually using a Yeti USB microphone for that high quality sound that you talked about, because the audio is very important. If your party can't hear you clearly, it's a problem. And some of the solutions out there are really terrific, in terms of really getting professional grade audio. Let's flip over to the reason why I got you on the podcast, and that is this new. I'm so jealous, I cannot tell you. I love the fact that you were tracking your iMac in terms of it being shipped out of. I think it came out of Asia, if I'm mistaken.
It came out of Shanghai. Right. And I have this great little.
And you ordered it directly from Apple, by the way, too. You went
right.
Apple.
Right. I have this great little app called for the Mac called Deliveries. There's also a version for iOS. Yes. And essentially, you put in all your tracking information, and not only does it show you, kind of what the status is in text, but it maps it. So you can actually see when it comes across the Pacific Ocean from China, lands in, wherever it lands on the West Coast, moves to the FedEx hub at Memphis, and then to Houston. And so it's kind of fun, and it refreshes regularly. So, if you're excited about getting your thing, you don't have to refresh.
Well, in fact, I think it's $4.99, because I actually, at your urging in your blog, I actually downloaded it myself a few days ago, and it's terrific because you can have packages coming from different sources, UPS, the United States Post Service. Now, of course, a lot of the carrier services provide tracking capability, but I like the fact that it's very convenient. You can have multiple packages from different carriers. So thank you for that tip. It's a great app. And I will tell you the thing about that Apple learned with the whole tracking thing, and why it's a part of the the buying experience when you're buying a new computer. I don't know if anybody whether you, Dwight, or whether any of our listeners has ever gotten a German car like a BMW or an Audi, but BMW does an exceptional job at this, is that if you buy a car from them, and especially if they build the car in Germany, it's a whole experience the way they track it. The car is now in pre-assembly, now it's being built, it's going through quality testing, and you can see all these phases, and then of course it gets shipped, and you can track it as it's going over on the water. So it is quite an experience, especially when you're making an expenditure like that, because an iMac is not exactly an inexpensive purchase.
Well, that BMW sounds like Domino's with their pizza tracker,
and you could probably say that Domino's picked that up from BMW. But let's talk about first, before we get to the iMac, what you liked, what you didn't like. I did glance at your review this morning, and it sounds like there was a lot that you did like. Why did you let's talk about the exact configuration itself, because I'm always curious about why did you make the choices that you did in terms of storage,
sure.
memory, and the processor, the 2 or 3 big choices that you had to make.
Sure. So I bought the mid-tier item with the opening, with the basic processor, mainly because I wasn't, I don't do anything that's really intensely it's processor intensive. But that said, the processor that's in here, which is a 6-core Core i5 Intel processor, is pretty robust, and it has an ATI Radeon gaming card that's
GPU, right?
Right, and so it's I could easily play games on here and get a decent experience doing that if I wanted to. I may process occasional video for things that I do for the Chronicle, but I'm not going to do like a 2-hour movie. A 5-minute video would process very quickly on this. So I didn't really need anything particularly high end. And when you're dealing, of course, with Apple and you're not made of money, you're going to have to. Things are going to get more expensive as it ramps up. So I did that. I got 16 gigabytes of RAM. The base is 8, and I thought about getting the 8 and then upgrading it myself, which would be cheaper. But I also decided, no, I'll start with 16. That probably should be the base, and then later, if I want to, RAM is cheap enough that I could upgrade and do more. I don't think I'll need more given what I do.
Well, and truth be told, Apple has over the years have really shied away from user replaceable upgrades. I mean, the iMac is one of the remaining products where you can upgrade the memory. You can't upgrade the storage. The solid state storage is all fixed and it's soldered to the system board. And I have actually, when my existing iMac, it's actually pretty straightforward, and you can save a bunch of money. It's not very hard to do it. Right. And I've got 64 gig in my iMac, and it, and that really does help you from a performance standpoint, especially if you're doing a lot of, CPU intensive applications. But why did you step? I'm a bit surprised at. Why didn't you step up to the highest end CPU? Was it just clearly you don't think you needed the horsepower?
I didn't need it. I mean, I really didn't think I needed it, and and I can tell you, I have not wanted at all for anything performance related so far. It has not at all been an issue. My usage is primarily day-to-day is work stuff. Probably the toughest thing I do regularly is I do a lot of video editing, and often with large video files, but it just handles it fine. I also use virtual machines, both Windows and Mac virtual machines. I'm running Catalina here. We have an application at the Chronicle that we use that is not 32-bit, so it wouldn't run on Catalina. So I've got Mojave and a virtual machine. I run that. I run Windows and keep Windows up to date, so I essentially can have a Windows machine, and both of them run great. I don't ever need to run them side by side, which then I might need more memory. But for the kinds of things I do, the processor is just fine. I bumped it up from 512 to a terabyte of storage. What's interesting about this configuration on the Mac, the iMac, is that if you go to the 2 terabyte, and I think there's a 5 terabyte drive, those actually are not fixed to the motherboard. And so you could get in there and say, if you had the 2 terabyte, you could upgrade to the next one. but it's the other ones, yes, are kind of fixed to the motherboard if you get with the more standard storage configuration.
Yeah, the iMac, I'm a little nervous about prying up in the iMac.
Yes, I have done it. I've done it with the old 24-inch kind of thick one. I replaced the hard drive in one once, and it was not that hard, but it's really nerve-wracking because there's a lot of like small wires you have to pop open and so forth. And I did it fine, and did a blog post that became fairly popular about it. But it's not something I don't think I would want to do with this machine at all.
No, it's funny because about a year ago, got my mother a Mac Mini. I think it's their most current model, about a year and a half ago, and I did actually upgrade the memory because I didn't want to pay the Apple tax for the memory. And I will tell you, even though you could do it, on my mother's kitchen table, I probably had 45 little tiny screws, and of course, I had to go out and buy. By the way, and they sell these on Amazon. By the way, they're Apple. They're toolkits specifically for Apple PCs with the right bits. And my mother walked over at one point where and I knew what I was doing, but it took me probably a good hour to make the upgrade. She thought I was defusing a bomb. There were so many parts all over. There's no way the average user could ever do what you're doing. So getting back to your impressions, so you're very pleased with the performance
Yes, the performance is excellent. So, for example, I mentioned the virtual machines that I use, and one of the things about the virtual machines is you can, if you've never worked with one, you can get it up and running, and then you could suspend it. And what it does is it takes the memory, the state of the virtual machine in memory, and saves it as an image file to the drive. And then when you restart it, it takes that image and loads it back into memory. It's exactly the way it was.
Yes.
So on the Mac Mini, say with running, as I mentioned, I use Mojave sometimes. With the Mac Mini, I would take, suspend it. It would probably take 5 to 7 seconds to suspend and come back up again. It takes 2 seconds on this to do that.
It is dramatically faster.
Yes. Now, the memory is faster, the SSD is faster, the processor is faster. And so it's probably a combination of things. But when I'm ready, before, when I wanted to launch a virtual machine, I kind of had to stop and wait for it. And now I click, I take a breath, and I'm working. And that is pretty impressive.
Well, and are you using Parallels or VM?
Parallels.
So I'm a Parallels guy myself, and I love my advice to people that if technically speaking, you can do some gaming on a Parallels VM on a Mac, but let's face it, you really have to have first of all, most of the really good PC gaming is on our Windows. There's really not that many great games on Mac OS. But I like to tell people, if you're going to do gaming, you're probably better off with a Windows PC. The virtual solutions are a bit challenging. But as a productivity device for just using Office 365 and other applications, it's fabulous. In fact, I think you and I talked about this before, is that, and we'll talk about it in a second when we talk about the Apple Silicon dynamic of this discussion, which will inspire a lot of chatter 3 or 4 months from now. It'll be interesting to see how well a program like a Parallels runs on Apple Silicon, emulating an Intel architecture x86 CPU. And it'll be ironic because in many ways, I think Windows runs better in a VM than it does sometimes on a dedicated Windows PC.
Oh yeah.
From a compatibility standpoint and from a driver standpoint. So let's get to the other question that I really wanted to hit you with, because we're doing this podcast on your new swanky iMac, and that is the webcam. Because the webcam is a dramatic step up. I'm using a Logitech Brio camera, which is a 4K camera, and the visual, it really is almost broadcast quality imagery. Let's talk about it. You look fabulous, in terms of, maybe not you personally, Dwight.
I look fabulous.
Yeah, I'm being very, very nice, but the picture is beautiful. So talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, have you got any compliments from other people that you've done Zoom calls over the last few days?
No, but I'm telling most of the Zoom calls I've had have been with, my staff and the people I work with, and they're, journalists, and they're not paying much attention to that. If they were a techie, would probably notice it. But I know that when you're on a Zoom call and you've got the the grid view and you can see everybody else, I have to admit I look a hell of a lot better than my colleagues do. And So it is definitely a much better experience than it was before. I had, in fact, because of my issue with the Mac Mini's background, I had bought a Logitech webcam, one of the, like the 615C, I think, which is a lower end one, but still HD, and it worked very well. And on there, this is much better than that. It's got a little more color correction. It handles low light better. I'm not using its microphones now. I'm using the microphone on on my AirPods. But actually, let me switch over. I can switch to the microphone.
I was going to ask you that because there is a new microphone capability in these new iMacs.
Right. And so now I am on the iMac microphone. I don't know if that sounds any different to you.
It sounds a bit distant, but that's because you're not close to the mic. But it is clear. But it is clear.
I'm in a room that's echoey.
Yes.
So probably getting some of that. But it's probably decent and probably would be fine in a in a Zoom
call.
Session.
Sure. Yep. And one thing I'll suggest to you that I've done with my existing iMac, Dwight, is I'm a big graphics performance type of guy, and one of the downsides of an all-in-one form factor is that whatever graphics card you get with, you've got to live with for quite a bit of time.
Right.
However, and maybe not all users are aware of this. There are Mac OS supports external GPUs. So I actually have one by Sonnet, and there's a few companies out there that make it. It's it almost looks like a shoebox, and it allows you to get discrete graphics cards. Yes, they have to be AMD based because the Mac OS doesn't really fully support NVIDIA graphics cards. But I've been able to upgrade the graphics on my unit a couple of times over the last 3 years. And I just plug it into the USB-C port, and I get all the benefits of upgraded graphics performance.
So you mentioned the USB port. One of the things I have a couple of gripes about.
Please.
This iMac. So it only has 2 USB-C ports, and what's interesting, unless you buy a high-end dock, it's typically USB-C, less expensive USB-C adapters and expanders only pass through power. Yes. And won't pass through. So, I feel kind of limited. I probably end up buying a more expensive dock with more USB-C connections as time goes on. But that the fact that it has 4 USB-A and 2 USB-C ports, I kind of almost wish it was flipped, or maybe 3 and 3.
I haven't been able to find. Because I don't believe the current USB-C spec supports this, but with USB-A, you can buy a splitter. You plug one device to a USB port, and you might be able to buy a strip with 4, 5, 6 USB ports, so you can multiply the number of ports. You can't do that with USB-C. At least I haven't been able to find an adapter out there that does that, because that's the problem with USB-C, is that if you only have 2 or 3 or 4, you're pretty much limited to 2 or 3 or 4. You can't multiply them with some type of adapter.
There's I think a full dock, like some of the
dock might be a dock. Yes,
right. A dock does it, but that's $200 or $300.
$100. Yeah, it's an expensive an option.
Right. So that's one thing that bothers me a little bit. The other thing, and this is a really interesting discovery, but I remembered it from my previous iMac. I have a set of Klipsch 2.1 speakers, and those are incredible speakers. But the problem is that when I went to plug it into the jack, because the back where it starts is curved a little bit, the jack wouldn't go in all the way. The plug wouldn't go in all the way, and I got a hum. And I wound up having to buy a USB to 2.5 audio jack in order to be able to plug my speakers in, which was kind of annoying. But I remembered that from my previous iMac, so it's not a new problem that Apple hasn't solved. I've got a cat over here.
I know. You have a visitor. A visitor has ended.
He may jump on me. He may suddenly appear here, so don't be surprised.
I wonder if you could have gotten like a little tiny audio cable extender just to plug into the port, and then you plug in the,
Yeah, but I
the mail
wasn't sure
cable.
that I wouldn't have the same problem.
Maybe, yeah, that's
Because
true.
it's because of the curve, and so it works fine. And actually, the sound, the audio from this Mac is noticeably better than it was on my Mac Mini. I mean, music sounds. The speakers have always sound great, but the music is much fuller, and it's being pumped out at more power. And so I'm really happy with the sound of it on.
So on balance, because we've just got a few minutes here left here, you're pretty happy with it, and you're glad you made the upgrade.
Yes, and you had wanted to talk about the not waiting for Apple Silicon.
I want to hit that topic. That's important.
Okay.
Why did you not wait?
All right. So there's a couple of reasons. Number one, for my job, I need to be able to use the latest Apple operating system. And one of the reasons I had to replace this at all was because the Mac Mini is no longer supported. This is the 2012 Mac Mini, which was the last Mac Mini where you could replace both the storage and the memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually very popular. Probably a year or so ago, I was seeing Mac Minis at the configuration that I had selling for close to $1,000 on eBay. So it was a really popular device because of that. I was loath to give it up, but I needed it, and I was going to wait for Apple Silicon because some of the early rumors indicated that there would be a desktop and a notebook in the first round of Apple Silicon devices coming at the end of this year. Mm-hmm. But as time went on, those rumors changed, and almost everyone who has view into the pipeline is indicating that it's probably going to be a couple of portables. That means I would have had to wait until sometime into the next year. And even then, I thought about it, I'd be buying version 1.0. And what I probably, if I wanted an Apple Silicon device, I probably would have waited for the 2022 revision. And I just couldn't wait that long. Right. When this came out and it had the specs that it did, and it was just such a beautiful machine, and it kind of did exactly what I wanted. And knowing that every Mac I've had has been supported by Apple for at least 8 years, because the Mac Mini was 2012 to 2020, I felt comfortable buying this.
Right.
And so I decided to go ahead, all things considered, and pull the trigger. I probably in the next 2 years, or possibly next year, I'll need to replace my Mac notebook because it will no longer be able to support. It's a 2014, and so I probably will end up having to replace that. And when that happens, I'll get an Apple Silicon device. The only thing that I really will be missing that I would really want to have is the ability to run iOS apps on a desktop or a notebook. I won't have that. But other than that, I think I'm really happy with this. I don't think I'll have any Apple Silicon envy when they come out.
But the net is your holdup was not, if Apple Silicon was available today, even versus an Intel based offering, you would not have had any qualms, buying a unit with Apple Silicon right now if it was available.
Well, I have. Well, so we talked about the Parallels issue, mm-hmm. And Parallels demonstrated during the keynote at the Worldwide Developers Conference, running Parallels on a Mac.
Yes.
The problem is it didn't show Windows. It showed a Linux operating system. And when you ask Parallels officially whether it will run Windows, you get the dreaded, "We have nothing to share at this time." And so I didn't really have confidence as to what Parallels on a Silicon Mac would look like. You have to remember that there's a lot of emulation will be going on a Silicon iMac. There will be the emulation used to run Intel-based apps. There's no guarantee that every Intel-based app will work on Apple Silicon. So there were kind of too many ifs. And when I talk about revision 1.0, I'm not necessarily talking about the hardware. I'm also talking about the software that's out there. So I need to be able to work from the get-go. And so even if like there were two side by side, you could choose either Intel or you could choose an Apple Silicon iMac. With the stuff that I don't know, I probably still would have gone with Intel.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a reasonable answer. I mean, I guess just in closing,
that was Siri.
I know it sounded like it was Siri was in your house, but just to close this out, I think that it would be hard for me to believe that Parallels, if they technically can make it work, which I'm sure there is a will, and you're willing to accept the performance trade-offs because there's emulation involved and there's layers of emulation. That's a different story. But I mean, the bulk of their customers are using Parallels to run Windows. I mean, I'm sure they have some customers using other operating systems, but I mean, to me, they're not really much of it's not a viable product going forward. An Apple Silicon, if they don't have an offering, although Apple has claimed that they'll be building Intel-based Macs for the next couple of years. They've said that publicly. So it's maybe not so much a performance issue, but there also may be compatibility issues with apps that are running on Windows that are kind of emulated on emulation, and so there's kind of too many unknowns. I have the latest version of Parallels 16, which was released last week. And it's also, I've only installed it on this, so I don't know how it would have run on the Mac Mini, but it in and of itself is much better and much faster. So, they clearly, Parallels improves a lot with each iteration. And they have the technical know-how to probably get Windows running. I just, given all of the unknowns, and that being one of them, I probably still would have gone with Intel. Right. Well, Dwight, I think we're about out of time here. I want to make sure that your cat is well fed, because I know the cats get very upset.
I think the cat's finally figured out it's time to go to sleep. So,
well, listen, Dwight, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. I want to thank the More Insights and Strategy audience for listening to today's podcast. Please follow us in our usual social media partners, suspect partners. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great weekend.